The opening scene features a young girl named Mary who is playing with her cat, Shining, in her backyard, where an unidentified person suddenly appears from behind and abducts her. In the next scene, we see a stranger who enters a small town's police station amidst a Christmas Eve rainstorm. He approaches Sergeant Gulloy at the front desk and expresses his intention to confess. When asked for more details, the stranger reveals that his confession is about a murder. Hearing this, Sergeant Gulloy becomes alarmed and aims a handgun at him before calling for backup from his colleagues. Following this, all the officers walk out at the desk and instruct the stranger to place his hands on his head. The team leader, Detective Alexander Black, then orders the officers to take the stranger to the interrogation room. Inside the interrogation room, two police officers named Deputy Jack Hawkins and Deputy Jerry Pine question the stranger about his identity. However, the stranger insists on being known as Mr. Nobody, refusing to disclose his real name. His real name must be something like Perkins or Peabody. As the interrogation progresses, the stranger deliberately provokes Jack, prompting the officer to almost assault him. At the same time, Detective Alexander enters the room and interrupts the situation. He tries to extract information from the stranger, but Mr. Nobody remains unresponsive. As a result, Alexander instructs the officers to mugshot and fingerprint him before placing him in his cell. Just before leaving, Mr. Nobody notices a dedication text on Detective Alexander's golden metal pen and remarks upon it. This draws the suspicion of the detective, who seems to have received that pen from his missing daughter, Mary. On the other hand, in a secret room of the police station, Deputy Toby Sherwood and Deputy Jane Hollows are engaged in a private moment. During this, Jane experiences a vision of Mr. Nobody watching them from a distance. However, the mysterious figure vanishes when she looks at it for the second time. Toby inquires about what she saw, but she dismisses it as a possible hallucination caused by excessive caffeine. If coffee could do that, I'd be tripping balls all the time. Meanwhile, the officers find themselves perplexed upon discovering that the stranger does not possess any fingerprints. In light of this revelation, Jack decides to cross-reference the stranger's appearance with past criminal records. For this, he firstly examines the recently taken mugshot of Mr. Nobody, and is startled to find that it has only captured the clothes the stranger was wearing. Just then, Jack hears the stranger whistling an eerie tune, which sends shivers down his spine. However, he conceals his fear and steps outside to calm himself with a cigarette. Shortly after, Alexander instructs his subordinates to bring the stranger back to the interrogation room for further questioning. Toby then asks Gulloy about the cell in which the stranger has been held, to which the latter responds with cell number 4. Toby and Jerry proceed to that particular cell, only to discover it empty. Surprisingly, the stranger is moved to cell number 3. Despite this unusual occurrence, the officers do not pay much attention and dismiss it as a simple oversight on Gulloy's part. Outside the police station, Jack's trembling hand shows his fear as he smokes, clearly affected by recent events. Moments later, he heads inside and confides in Jerry that the stranger bears a striking resemblance to a drifter whom they had arrested a year ago during their investigation into the disappearance of Mary Black. When they were unable to prove him guilty, Jack and the others resorted to assaulting him in an attempt to extract a confession, even though the accused vehemently maintained his innocence. However, Jerry dismisses Jack's claim, urging him not to dwell on it. After this, Jack proceeds to the basement to inspect the underground cells, while Alexander and the remaining officers continue the interrogation of Mr. Nobody. The stranger, who confesses to 6 murders, chillingly describes the details of his first killing. Astonishingly, Jack begins to experience the described torture firsthand, even though the stranger himself remains confined. Mr. Nobody claims to have stalked his victim, imprisoned him in a dark room, and subjected him to a brutal assault. In parallel, Jack finds himself trapped in one of the dimly lit cells, enduring a vicious beating on his back. The sound of his screams reaches the ears of the other officers, prompting Alexander, Jerry, and Gulloy to rush to the basement. To their horror, they discover the lifeless body of Jack. Overwhelmed by shock, they immediately handcuff the stranger and lock him up in the interrogation room before embarking on a thorough search of the area. Jerry and Gulloy cautiously venture outside, armed with their guns, to investigate the surroundings. Suddenly, a lifeless cat's body falls onto Gulloy's head, sending him into a state of panic. It didn't even land on its feet. Upon closer examination, they discover a collar on the cat's neck bearing the name Shining, which makes them realize that it is the same cat Mary used to play with. They quickly report their findings to Alexander, who is unable to understand what's going on. Jerry then recalls Jack's earlier claim and shares it with the others, revealing that the 6 of them had wrongly arrested and subjected an innocent man to torture in the past, all for the sake of Mary. Galoy informs the group that the victim of their unjustified violence is still in a coma, being cared for at a medical facility. In the midst of their discussion, they hear footsteps on the roof, prompting Alexander to send Galoy and Jerry to investigate, while the remaining 3 officers return to continue their investigation with the stranger. Mr. Nobody then proceeds to describe his second victim, asserting that the person was a coward who made no attempt to fight back. According to the stranger's account, he approached the victim from behind, strangled him with a rope, and hanged him to death. Astonishingly, Galoy's body suddenly appears outside the window, suspended by a rope, exactly how the stranger described. The officers are gripped with terror.
Stop fooling around out there, Galoy,
prompting them to confine the stranger in a cell and to decide to contact the medical facility to gather information about the drifter. To their shock, they discover that the victim had died earlier that evening, precisely at the same time the stranger entered the police station. This revelation proves that the stranger is not the person they believed him to be. Following the mysterious deaths of 2 officers, the remaining members of the group resolve to seek assistance from other officers. They attempt to contact them through radio signals, but their efforts prove futile. Following this, Toby and Jane set off in search of help, driving through the woods. As they proceed, they come across another patrol car and decide to pull over. Stepping out of their vehicle, they investigate the other police car, but find it empty. Meanwhile, at the police station, Alexander and Jerry approach the stranger's cell. To their shock, the stranger expresses his readiness to confess to yet another murder. Recognizing a pattern, Alexander frantically instructs Jerry to contact their 2 colleagues and summon them back to the station. Jerry hurries to the control room, attempting to reach Toby and Jane through the radio. Unfortunately, the bad weather causes poor signal reception, preventing him from reaching them. At the same time, the stranger proceeds with his confession, describing how he awaited his 3rd victim in a dark location. Despite Alexander's command to stop talking, Mr. Nobody disregards the order and reveals that upon the victim's arrival, he positioned himself between them. In response, Alexander draws his gun and fires at the stranger. Startled by the sound of the gunshot, Jerry runs back to the cell, only to find that Alexander is firing at an empty space. Moments later, the stranger reappears in a different cell, declaring that he had mercilessly attacked his 3rd victim. Simultaneously, in the woods, Toby scans the surroundings in search of their fellow officers, while Jane attempts to fix the radio signal inside the car. Suddenly, Toby is ambushed from behind and fatally stabbed with a shovel. Shortly after, Jane realizes Toby's absence and calls him out by name, but receives no response. As she investigates the area, she discovers his ravaged body and becomes terrified. In a state of panic, she hastily gets back to the car and drives back to the police station. Upon her arrival, Jane tells her superiors about what she had witnessed. With this, Alexander finally grasps the chilling truth that the stranger's confessions manifest as actual killings, with each confession resulting in a corresponding death. Moreover, Alexander deduces that the stranger may be the vengeful spirit of the drifter they had tortured in the past, haunted by the injustices inflicted upon him. Alexander should change his name to Sherlock. Following the harrowing events, the 3 remaining officers make a desperate decision to flee the police station and find a safe place. Jane takes the driver's seat as the trio gets into the car. Unfortunately, the car fails to start. Alexander and Jerry step out to inspect the engine, leaving Jane inside. In an eerie turn of events, the radio mysteriously activates, emanating the voice of the stranger.
It's me, bitches,
says the voice. The stranger declares that it is time for another confession, sending Jane into a state of terror. She attempts to escape from the car, but finds the door locked. Frantically, she screams for help, and Alexander and Jerry exert all their strength to shatter the car window, but to no avail. Inside, Jane's head gets ensnared in a plastic bag, causing her to suffocate. Despite Alexander and Jerry trying to break the window, they are unable to save Jane. Amidst this commotion, the voice on the radio proclaims that the unleashed wrath from the unknown depths has come to claim her in death. After some time, Jane's head is detached from her body and falls out of the car. Filled with panic, Jerry decides to kill the stranger they have held captive. He enters the police station with his gun, approaches the cell, and starts firing relentlessly at the stranger until his ammo runs out. Once he finishes, Jerry enters the cell, only to discover that it is completely empty. Moments later, the stranger narrates his next confession, announcing that his 5th victim never saw him coming. Without delay, Mr. Nobody attacks Jerry, committing yet another brutal murder. Having witnessed this horrific act, Alexander, the sole remaining officer, attempts to flee. However, the stranger asserts that Alexander cannot hide in the darkness,
I was born into the darkness.
and that every path leads to him. Just as he said, Alexander enters a club for help, but somehow ends up inside the police station, where he is confronted by the stranger once again. Helpless, Alexander offers an apology for assaulting an innocent suspect. In response, the stranger reveals a shocking truth. He was the one responsible for murdering Alexander's daughter. The detective is shaken by this revelation and demands an explanation for the unfolding nightmare. The stranger claims that he sought revenge. According to him, he had languished in a coma for nearly a year, and all this time, he dreamt of vengeance. The stranger then proceeds to make his final confession, revealing that Detective Alexander Black is his ultimate victim. However, before the stranger can divulge more details, Alexander impales his own ears with his daughter's golden metal pen, desperately attempting to avoid hearing the confession. Seeking refuge, Alexander hides beneath a desk, where he experiences a vision of his deceased daughter. In this vision, Mary informs him that the stranger is an evil person, but Alexander has the power to stop him. When asked how, Mary discloses that the stranger despises his own name and wishes to keep it anonymous. Nonetheless, Mary tells him that she knows the stranger's name and whispers it into his deafened ear. How did he hear it then? Armed with this newfound knowledge, Alexander rises, clutching his gun, and boldly addresses the stranger by his name. Stanley Harperton. I knew it was nerdy. This unexpected revelation unsettles the stranger, and seizing this opportunity, Alexander fires his shotgun at the stranger, causing him to plummet through a window and vanish from sight. In the aftermath of this event, the sun ascends on the following Christmas Day. Alexander catches a final glimpse of his daughter on the stairs. She bids him farewell with a wave and walks away, presumably leaving for the afterlife.